Good evening. This is the January 19th, 2022 meeting of the East Cambridge Neighborhood Conservation District Study Committee. I'm Charlie Sullivan, Executive Director of the Cambridge Historical Commission. Before beginning the meeting, I will first confirm the members of the committee are present and can hear me. Ronald Kramer Jr. Yep, I see you there. Thank you.
Present.
William Dines.
Present.
Francesca Gordini.
Present.
Valerie Reese, I think is not present. Gavin Cleespies, not present. Paula Paris.
Present.
Thank you. And Kyle Sheffield is not present. We have 4 committee members present, which represents a quorum of the 7 members. I'll now call the meeting to order. City staff, when I say your name, please say present. Sarah Burks, Preservation Planner.
Present.
Eric Hill, Survey Director.
Present.
Thank you. Pardon me while I read this boilerplate statement. This public meeting is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we've been advised and is directed to suspend in-person public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. This meeting, the study committee is convening by Zoom webinar. Please note that we are recording the meeting and we will share the recording files with CityView 22 for later broadcast. The agenda is posted on the Historical Commission's website on the East Cambridge NCD study page. We will screen share the staff slides via Zoom during the meeting and add them to the web page after the meeting. The URL for the NCD study page is https://tinyurl.com/ecncd study. John, I hope I got that right. Meeting ground rules. To the committee members, please mute your audio to prevent background noise distractions, and remember to unmute yourself before beginning to speak. Please speak clearly to help staff who prepare the minutes. Please identify yourself each time you speak, as some attendees may be joining us with audio-only connections. This meeting will conclude no later than 8 p.m. to stay within the broadcast window. After committee members have asked questions and had discussion, we will have time for public comment. I will first ask members of the public who wish to speak to use the raise hand button in Zoom to alert us that you wish to be heard. Only comments related to tonight's agenda will be allowed. If comments are deemed out of order, I may ask you to focus your comments on the matter at hand. Derogatory remarks or personal attacks will not be allowed. Staff will call on each speaker by name and ask you to unmute your audio and state your full name and address. Depending on the time available, we may have to cut speakers off after 2 minutes. We recommend sending comments to staff via email at ehill@cambridgema.gov so we can forward them to the committee members prior to the next meeting. Okay, and Happy New Year. So I'll go right into the PowerPoint slides. And here we go. So the agenda for tonight is the same as the agenda for last month's meeting. We've still got some edits to the draft preliminary report. We're going to talk about neighborhood outreach and talk about where we're going to go from here. So I have a bunch of slides that have been part of every presentation for the last couple of years. I'm not going to read them, but they're on the website in every presentation, and they provide a brief description of what is a neighborhood conservation district, how is it different from an historic district, what is the National Register of Historic Places, We described the study area boundaries that are illustrated on this map, which the perimeter includes the traditional residential area of East Cambridge from Monsignor Bryan Highway to Rogers Street, and from mostly from 2nd Street, but a little bit on 1st Street out to the railroad tracks. So here's the detail for the first discussion item for tonight. This is the table of contents for the preliminary report, which we've circulated before the meeting in a second draft. Or I'm not sure how many drafts we've had, but anyway, the first complete package was distributed at before the last meeting. And the amendments to that were discussed. Those amendments have been incorporated into the most recent distribution on January 14th. And now the entire 75-page document is on the website for people to find and follow along. So since the last meeting, which incorporated a number of comments and edits, we added discussion of public involvement and another discussion of a further discussion of community concerns that have been raised during the study committee's deliberations. So those appear on page 48 and 49 through 51 of the current draft of the report. And I'm not sure if what committee members want me to do here, but this is the text of the description that we added about the initial meetings in 2020 at the East End Union, including the epic March meeting that had to be terminated before it was over. And then the story ends at the emergency suspension of public meetings in March 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the text picks up with at September 10th, 2020, when the Historical Commission voted to renew the study. So I would ask commission or study committee members, how do you want to treat this? Have you looked at this? Does it make sense to include it at all? Is this a fair description of the process? And does it add constructively to the debate?
Charlie, this is Bill. I had a question. You sent out just momentarily a little while ago some things that were omitted from the report. Is that to be included in this section, or is that separate?
This
I didn't get a chance to read what you sent out.
Right, this was sent out on Friday. It was
okay. Then I read this. Okay.
Yeah,
I read this then.
I'll get to the other later. Yeah,
I wasn't sure if you incorporated any of the any changes in what you just recently sent out with that would supplant this information.
I'll get to that. I'll get to that, but this is the same.
I mean, I read that over. I think that's a fair summary of how we started off. I don't know how anybody else feels on the study group, but I felt it was, a fair representation of what happened.
It is a rather fair representation of what happened at that meeting. I understand that it seems to have been important to include this portion. I think it kind of takes away from the real subject, which would be discussing planning and a conservation district. I almost would have been tempted of putting this as an addenda, perhaps, but I guess the necessity for describing events arose, and I think the description is fair. And
Paula, I
in
saw
doing
you-
so, then
I'm sorry.
I don't recall. Then I feel like it's probably missing the outreach, a summary of the outreach that was done in the previous meeting that occurred before this, the start of this. But again, I think it's also a little bit unnecessary. Planning and discussing what a conservation district does is, to me, way more important than reporting who said what in which instance and all of this. But that's it. That's my comment. The content is fair.
Hey, Charlie, Ron Creamer here. I'm a little torn with the text. I'm grateful that you did take a stab at writing this. Did you author this description of the events of that night?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, well,
No.
Eric authored it and I edited it. So
I'm a
yeah,
little
it's-
concerned. I was concerned that all opposition or hesitancy about having an NCD in East Cambridge was being hit with was being classified with this event and dismissed with this meeting. So I thought it was important to include it because there was a big gap in the narrative up until then. So thank you for doing that. I just want to make sure that it's dangerous in that I think the narrative here dismisses other citizens that had other concerns about a neighborhood conservation district at that meeting. You've identified what you thought the principal complaint was, and I'll take your word for it. It wasn't my impression of the meeting, but it seems to be the majority of the study committee members' recollection. But I am grateful that we have this other area in the report where we're able to account for some of the concerns expressed by people in the community. So I'm a little bit torn. I don't know if I want to fight too hard for or against this. I just think it's a little bit heavy-handed against how the events went down. And I think it's a little bit one-sided, my opinion. But I just hope that we're not going to reject the other people that had legitimate concerns that weren't related to white people, whatever the accusation was. I just don't want all the people's concerns being lumped into one group, one category, because I think that would be unfair. That's my comment.
Fair enough. Thank you, Ron. Paula, I saw you looked like you wanted to speak.
What was I doing? I actually agree with Ron for slightly different reasons. I think that it might be better to just in the middle here, the primary contention of the opponent seemed to see that the study represented an attempt by some property owners rather than I mean, I have heard those words, but I think that for this kind of a report, for this summary, that those are that older and white are just triggers for not reading any farther. And I would not like to see that happen. I also, the city staff were unable and concluded the meeting 10 minutes early without any resolution I think, because we never got to that. I was at that meeting. This is a very polite description of what went on. And I think that a couple of people that I know, one, they did not live in the district. And two, they told me that they were there because they believed that this was about affordable housing, that this meeting was about affordable housing, which it was not. So I'm not sure how to capture that. People, I agree with you, Ron. I think that there was concerns, but they were difficult to hear because of how it erupted. And I do think that needs to be captured, but I would stay away from trigger words to describe this.
Okay.
Even though we heard them, but I just think that it doesn't have a place in this report.
Yep. Circling back to you, Bill.
Yeah, Charlie, I wouldn't have a problem with striking older white people, although it was said and it was directed.
And it was directed at you. Yeah, no,
It was directed at me, and
It
a
was
few other
directed at
things were
you.
directed at me about trying to enrich myself, financially, and manipulating city rules and regulations by signing a petition to get this whole thing started. So, but I wouldn't have a problem with taking those trigger words out. I agree with Paul. It's probably not a good thing to put that in.
Okay. Any more comments from members of the committee? Would open this to public comment.
Hey, Charlie, Ron Creamer here again.
Yeah.
How would it affect the paragraph if we just deleted the sentence, the primary contention? Because you do say a lot in the sentence beforehand. When public comment was solicited, the meeting became disorderly with some members of the public speaking over each other and making personal attacks on study committee members. Is that serve enough?
No, I think we need to keep in the primary contention of that meeting was, what it was.
Well, was that the loudest contention?
Stating that, well, the other contentions were that they just flat out said, no way they would support a conservation district in East Cambridge. It would just raise rents and cause more expenses for everybody. They didn't offer any concrete suggestions or any other types of constructive criticism or suggestions. It was just flat out, no, we don't want this in East Cambridge and we're opposed to it. And that's it. And then they
might be helpful to include
attacking.
that, Bill. It might be helpful to include. It might be helpful to include that part. If you don't want to, just by concentrating on the older white thing, I think I'm uncomfortable.
No, I think the older white is taken out, but I think that the contention was that it was just, this was all initiated by a group of people that want to enrich themselves. And I think that should be made pretty clear in this, if we're going to cover the origins of the study and cover what happened. That's just my personal opinion.
Wasn't the primary contention a concern about housing costs, and it lapsed into a personal attack at the end?
Well, it wasn't totally about housing costs. It was about everything. It was about rental prices skyrocketing, the pressures from all the commercial development surrounding East Cambridge, which is the main factor that's driving all the rental prices sky high and property prices sky high. It had nothing to do with, we felt, the establishment of a conservation district. We were trying to conserve and contain some of those escalating costs and burdens on renters and property owners.
If
Would
I
it-
may, as a renter, I would like to reiterate that what was, the way it's summarized, I think is quite polite and encompasses exactly what went on in the first place. The whole idea of making the neighborhood less expensive for renters is just an excuse, because we all know that the economy is not driven by a conservation district. And the economy and the cost of prices is definitely not driven by the city. Or rather, it is driven by the amount of pharmaceutical and high biotech that's been going around. And every time we do see a large property being bought and high density being put in place, that's exactly what happens when the price goes sky high. Those are the dynamics that fall in place.
Yeah, I think one could just, if one just looked at the globe today, you would see the effect of that. I mean, they had an
And
article
as a
in there.
renter, I am personally afraid that the higher density that we've seen occurring is actually not affordable. And that is what is pushing people like me out eventually in the long run.
Francesca and Bill, I do sympathize and I understand, but that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the
It
language.
is exactly what we're talking about, because it's not, it was not the first. It's the excuse that was used to make that type of attack. And the type of attack that was made was exactly the goal. That's
Well,
that's what I
I
think
could
is having sit at the meeting.
if I could interject here, I think it was questionable to me whether it was constructive to include this. It certainly was an event that happened. We tried to make the narrative as neutral as possible. The succeeding section we hope to address the concerns that people have expressed in the next section rather than here, because I didn't want to get bogged down in in the content of each single meeting, even this one, because it just didn't seem constructive. So
I agree.
I
I
think
would
it'd be-
personally take this out, Charlie. I don't think it's, as I said before, I don't think it just takes away from the conservation district topic, period.
well, why don't we?
Can we hold it and see if there actually is a place for it? I mean, I'm torn. If it's captured here on paper, is there a reasonable place to put it? I'm not ready to say yes or no right now, especially since I don't actually have, I don't know where it is, but I don't have the document in front of me. So I'm not sure if there's a place for it. But I am concerned about it. I think it might be distracting and detracting.
So why don't we hear from members of the public and then go on and talk about our summary of the issues that have been raised over the study period and come back to this.
In B. This is
Yeah.
part 3B. I'm
We'll
sorry, I've got
we'll get to
lots.
3B in a
Okay,
minute, but
okay, all right, I got it.
I'm going to leave this on the screen and let's open it for public comment. We have 5 people have lined up who want to speak about this. We're going to limit public comment to 2 minutes because we have a lot more business than this to get through tonight.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
Sarah.
Alan Green, you can go first, please. You can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, Alan Green. I live at 82 Fifth Street, which is in the limit of the study proposed. I just want to comment that in reading this text here and having attended that meeting in question, I think it's a fairly accurate representation of what happened. Changing older white property owners to some property owners seems fine with me, or maybe certain property owners rather than some. But I just want to say, I think it represents what did go on there. And I'll leave it to you all to decide whether or not you want to include it. I'm sorry I haven't been able to make it to any meetings for the last 4 months, so I don't know what steps came to this, but I'll leave it to you. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Mary Ellen, you can unmute yourself, please.
Hi, this is actually Brian Doran, her husband, at 48 Spring Street. And I just have a real quick statement. I'm a homeowner and resident of East Cambridge, and I am not getting any financial benefit from my opposition to this study and this study group. I was at that meeting and I expressed my disinterest in having an NCD. And I really object to the personal attack, the characterization of my opposition in something that isn't true. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Audrey Cunningham, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
First of all, I believe that the verbiage about the old rich white people should remain in there, because that is what they said. That is what happened. To whitewash this, I think, is a big mistake. I think it should be in as it was, and it shouldn't be deleted, because that is what happened. And if we're dealing with facts here, let's be honest. I mean, this is just whitewashing it. And the more we change this, the way it was originally, what I read earlier was fine. It should be kept in there, because that is what happened. I was at that meeting and I was totally insulted. And any other group that was insulted wouldn't be making a big deal of it. And why we should be ignored and this should be eliminated from the public record, I think, is a big mistake. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Audrey. Chuck Hines, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I agree with Audrey. That should be left in, old white, because that's what happened. Another thing, I was at that meeting too, and it says, this reads 40 signed in. I mean, people can imply that there's 40 people from the district. I know there are people from other cities at that meeting. So I think that should be clarified, how many people actually lived in the district attended. That's my comment.
Thanks, Chuck. Marie?
Hi, Marie Sicoccio, 55 Otis Street. I was at that meeting. And I agree with Chuck that most of the opposition that night and the interruptions were caused by people definitely not within the district, and I can name names. Also, I just forwarded to Charlie and to Eric and to Paula tweets today of the same culprit who's complaining about the planning board being filled with white older men. So it's the same thing all over again. I like it as written. I would keep in the white older people, because that actually captures more of what went on. I think Charlie's narrative actually is very polite compared to what we experienced that day. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Marilee, you can go next. Marilee Meyer. Okay, we'll come back to Marilee. Justin?
Hi, Justin Safe, 259 Hurley Street. I don't have a strong opinion on whether you include it or not, but I was at the meeting. I don't think it's a fair characterization at all. I think there's a fair amount of blame that resides with both the Historical Commission and the study committee itself. The study committee has consistently tried to hide from and deny the fact that they have produced a document prior to establishing the NCD study committee that said explicitly that the point of having the NCD was to increase home values. And that fact is not one that you can just try to hide from, or, you know, claim that no one was reacting to that fact. Of course, people have provided abundant evidence that neighborhood landmarking raises rents and housing costs. Everyone has attempted to ignore that evidence, has not engaged with it in good faith, is not including it in the report or other materials in good faith. And the entire process is so infected by this bias that it's unfairly being presented to residents of East Cambridge. And just because someone doesn't live in the study committee lines, which also have been up for debate the entire time, does that mean that they should not be considered a resident of East Cambridge or an interested party who can provide valid public input on the process? Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. John Wisnat.
Hi, this is John Wisnett, 61 Otis Street. I was at the meeting. I think the text is, as sent out as a draft today, represented what happened. And I would like to spend a minute just talking about, people refer to the words used here as trigger words. And then the question in my mind is, trigger words to what? So and again, as Maria pointed out, these trigger words are still being used on, you know, on Instagram this afternoon: older, white, homeowner, wealthy. The implication that I think was made explicit in more Instagram messages around the time of this meeting is that if you don't agree with this opposition, these trigger words mean that you're not only just wrong, but you're morally wrong. You need to be not only just denounced, but you need to be destroyed. It's a very extreme form of opposition that makes a dialogue almost impossible. So if you want to take this, you know, if anything, I think we would find the Instagrams that call us immoral. You know, let's cut to the chase of these trigger words. That's what this group is trying to define us as being, as opposed to being property owners who actually appreciate conservation. It's no more complicated than that. And yet this extreme group wants to make it a moral issue.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Yep.
Lauren Crow, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. I really am not sure why I'm even bothering to comment right now. I haven't been able to attend these meetings in months because I have another obligation on Wednesday nights normally. I have been catching up to the videos afterwards. You know, I have no notes. Write whatever you want to write in your report. We haven't tried to influence these meetings in months since it was clear that there wasn't a point. At the beginning of this process, we were promised a seat at the table. But it was clear you weren't prepared. You had no forum to incorporate opposing points of view. And the report reflects that. And folks know what's been going on this whole time. So the neighborhood knows, the city knows. The meeting in question, the March meeting, if you look back, it was advertised as a discussion about community goals for the NCD. And that's what we showed up for. That's why we were able to get folks who were interested and who hadn't been to any meetings before to show up. They expected an opportunity to talk about goals. We even submitted a set of alternative goals. It was actually in slides. Eric's got it in his inbox. So the idea that we had nothing constructive to say is frankly not true. We resubmitted those goals when the process kicked up again. And they were included again, but we were ready to talk about alternative goals. And that's what we wanted to talk about. Instead, we got a lecture, a repeat of a lecture about the history of the neighborhood that we'd already had twice before. And frankly, the meeting was under-led. There wasn't a chair in place who could deal with that crowd. And so it went off the rails.
2 minutes, Lauren. Why don't you wrap it up, please?
Yeah, I'd really like to address this comment about older white homeowners. So there's some nuance here, and I hope you'll indulge me with a couple extra seconds because I think something's really getting lost. I've never criticized any individual for being of any identity group. That would be wrong. But what I have done is criticized groups that are composed almost exclusively of older white homeowners who claim to represent a neighborhood where a majority rents, a majority is under 35, and nearly a majority are POC. You can't speak for the neighborhood if you don't look like the neighborhood. That's been my point all along. And if you're going to include facts about that meeting, you might also include that Bill Dines said that renters can't understand anything because we haven't remodeled a house. You might also include the slide that Bill Dines produced and presented to the ECPT that says that a primary objective was to increase property values in block development. Or don't. It's already been in the newspaper. It's been read into the ordinance committee hearing. Folks know. So,
okay, Lauren, I'm sorry, we're going to cut you off. We're not going to engage in personalities, and we're trying to stick to the topic
of me. And you say you're
Thank
not.
you, Sarah. Would you please call on the next citizen?
Betty Sacoccio, you can go next.
Okay, and let's not have this back and forth between members of the public. If you'd like to speak to the matter that's immediately before the committee, go ahead. But I don't want to have he said and she said back and forth between members of the public here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead,
Yep.
Betty.
Okay, I've been listening very patiently. I also was at that meeting that night. And to say that there was no leadership at that meeting, well, there couldn't be leadership at that meeting because other people took it over. It was a terrible, terrible meeting. It was aimed at a few people who really live and reside in the neighborhood. There was another individual who passed out handouts and pretended somehow or other that this was the official agenda of the meeting, which was not the case. So it went on and on. People were very disruptive, very disrespectful, and people even, one person stayed a little bit longer, one of my neighbors, and tried to, voice some concerns or clarify something with one of the individuals who actually spoke tonight prior to me. And, there was just no having it at all. We really are about conservation. We got interested because of what happened across the street on Otis Street from us at 66 to 70 Otis Street. That's why we're here tonight, because of the changes in the neighborhood such as that developers come in and they just see it as a way of doing whatever they want so they could get the most rent and pay little attention to the outside of any building. This is really a tragedy. And what happened across the street from one of the members of the committee really actually triggered this. And I know, Charlie, you really helped us in having the building landmarked and whatnot, so they couldn't go any further. And I thank you for that. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Marie. That's 2 minutes.
It's Betty.
So Sarah, if there's anyone who has not been heard, we'll hear from them, but I don't want to hear repeat comments.
Okay,
section.
the only person we haven't heard from was Marilee. Marilee, if you are there, you
Okay.
can.
We're going to hear from Marilee, and then we're going to move on to the next item, and we'll circle back to this.
I hesitate to weigh in, but I can't help thinking that several issues are being conflated here. conservation district, we're talking about nuts and bolts and material culture. And that's does not mean dismissing the socioeconomic and bigger issues that are all over Cambridge. I mean, I keep on coming back to, is a blue door racist? Is a dormer elitist? It's being conflated. And to me, a conservation district is about protecting a particular area. And we have seen over and over again, and in even in the planning board in discussion about affordable housing, that there is flexibility in a conservation district, and it is not as regimented as people think. And we are here to talk about protecting an area and not excluding people. This does not exclude people. So let's get back to what we're talking about. As far as your statement, I too tend to want to get rid of the trigger words, even though we know that the bigger audience, the bigger Cambridge residency, do they want to wade into this kind of thing or not?
Okay,
So keep it simple. Thank you.
Marilee.
Thanks.
Okay, that's it. We're going to move on to the next matter for discussion tonight, and then we can loop back into this because it's all part of the same document. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we'll pick up with the next insertion. So the next insertion runs for a couple of pages, and I realized this afternoon as I was putting the slideshow together, I had put in the first three subjects of public concern, but there we are. But the last two didn't make it. So at the last minute, I sent out to members of the committee, and Eric sent out to everyone else the entire insertion into this document. So I apologize for that, but I'll just summarize the language here. So what we tried to do in this case was to respond to the comment that we had not fairly represented the character of the debate and the matters that concerned many members of the public, that the report was one-sided. So we've categorized these comments as including housing affordability, whether or not to include the Cambridge Street Business District, cost of materials, the necessity of cost of professional representation, and the possibility of arbitrary and capricious behavior by future NCD commissioners. So the language that was added is here, and this was circulated last week. So it shouldn't be, I hope people read their emails, because I don't want to have to read this, all of this tonight. But the text describes the city's staff to respond to the concerns about housing affordability by compiling data on housing values and rental costs in areas in Cambridge with and without established neighborhood conservation districts. We quote the city council order that we were responding to by adding this material into the report, and summarize the consultation with the Community Development Department and the Assessing Department to analyze the impact of existing NCDs on property values in Avon Hill and the Half Crown Marsh conservation districts. This is a study that we did to address studies that members of the public have brought up that covered areas, different areas of the country, Dallas, Oklahoma City, and the like. We've been in touch with those jurisdictions, and this is a study that we think is valid, depending on data generated by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And despite, what people can say about statistics and the possibility of lying with statistics, this is the disinterested effort of other city departments, and we think our text responds appropriately to that. The second topic, let's see, Cambridge Street Business District. There has been a lot of discussion over the course of the study about whether or not to include the conservation district. The opponents of the district suggest that this would require additional costs, impose additional costs on property owners. We feel that an analysis of the report and the proposed jurisdiction of the study committee would simplify the burden on business owners and tenants on Cambridge Street, and that the commission could actually be helpful with signage by adopting rules similar to those in effect in Harvard Square that liberalize the very restricted Cambridge sign code. So the majority of the cases that we envision coming up on Cambridge Street would be settled administratively without a review, and that there could be advantages to Cambridge Street business owners that they might enjoy in the future. Another concern was the additional cost of materials and labor to conform to historic preservation standards. Certainly, there are many expensive building products on the market. Windows, for example, however, vary widely depending on material type and quality of the product. The guidelines of the Cambridge Historical Commission favor retaining historic wood windows, but where windows have already been replaced, which is probably the majority of the buildings in the district, the guidelines call for replacement in similar patterns to the original. We think that there is a conservation green aspect to retaining historic windows because numerous studies have shown that compared to historic windows protected by storm windows, energy savings from replacement windows will not recapture their cost before the new windows themselves fail and must be replaced. So we've seen many examples now that replacement windows have been on the market for several decades, that they themselves have to be replaced. So once you start doing that, you're on the homeowner is on an endless cycle of sending windows to the landfill as they exceed their useful life. So energy conservation, material conservation, conservation of material going to landfills is not directly a responsibility of the conservation district, but we think it's an additional value. And otherwise, many historic elements can be retained and restored at a cost less or similar to replacement. That's been our experience over many years, working with housing rehabilitation and affordable housing agencies, working with significant older buildings in Cambridge. Question of requiring professional representation. Professional representation is simply not required to bring a matter before a conservation district, but a matter that requires a building permit, such as an addition or raising a roof, will necessarily require architectural drawings to satisfy the Inspectional Services Department. Those are the same drawings that would be submitted to the Conservation District Commission. So there's just simply no additional professional involvement necessary, except perhaps attendance at a public hearing if that's necessary. So, and to repeat, there's simply not a requirement in any conservation district to bring attorneys, architects, engineers, or other professionals to a hearing. This is one of the paragraphs that was omitted, and the second section that was omitted was the possibility of arbitrary or capricious commission behavior. So this can happen in any board or commission. Commissioners in Cambridge are trained. Once they're appointed, they're screened in the first place to ensure that we have boards that are professionally qualified and relatively neutral in terms of personal agendas. We want members who are collegial, who can work well with others, reach a consensus decision when possible, and express reasoned opposition when that's not possible. And so when we screen volunteers for boards or study committees, those are the general criteria, and we make a recommendation, of course, to the city manager, who makes the appointment now with the consent of the city council. We have had occasions in the past when a member of a conservation district commission, and in one case, more than one member of a conservation district commission began to act arbitrarily and it expressed personal preferences in an inappropriate manner. And after some time of that, we decided with the city manager not to reappoint those members and to recruit new members for that commission. So the episode happened, it was addressed, and it was resolved. And so these concerns do happen. These episodes do happen in the best managed municipal boards, but there are ways of addressing them and alleviating the issue. In addition, staff attend all commission meetings and observe commissioners, advise commissioners and about their jurisdiction and responsibilities, and are able to report back when necessary on commissioner behavior. So that's our answer to this. And so I'll stop sharing, or let's just open it up to the study committee members about this language.
Hi, Charlie. Ron Creamer, study committee member here. Charlie, thank you for starting this section. As you know, this section probably started as a result of a memo I sent to you and Eric. Would you agree that the opposition's concerns weren't being given an airing in the report? So I'm just curious, when you got my concerns, my list of concerns, what was the reasoning behind your feeling that you needed to do a rebuttal to each one? Why would you not be comfortable just letting the concerns stand in the report?
Well, we don't have verbatim. I mean, you know, we had to generalize. We've had 2 years of meetings now, and we generalized the discussion points that were raised by study committee members and members of the public. And you know, I'm happy to consider more defined language if anybody wants to suggest it. If this
Sure.
isn't robust enough to reflect what people are concerned about.
Well, I think you do the whole study a disservice, Charlie, when you try to knock down each concern in a dismissive manner. It appears very rushed, factually incomplete, and it doesn't reflect well on the whole effort. So I would like you to, I'd like to address each and every one that you have there, and I'd like to add a few more, if I may. And I think I'd like to start with the one about the housing costs,
Well,
housing affordability,
Okay.
we call it. Can we talk about that?
yeah, sure. I'll tell you that the most useful thing for us would be to get actual language. If you can put, I don't want to say pen to paper, if you can write or edit or submit language, that would be terrific. But why don't you give us the high
I can make
points?
it very simple for us all, Charlie. So housing affordability is not my bailiwick. It's not my area of expertise. What is really disappointing to me is your conclusion that that Cambridge study that you chaired determined that it had no impact on housing costs. And I thought that was absurd. I was there. I heard the methodology, all the problems listed with the methodology. The best you could say is it was inconclusive. So you start by saying it's inconclusive. There are contradictory reports. But then all of a sudden, magically, that evening, when you presented with the Community Development Department, you conclusively determined that there's no effect on housing and affordability. That's absurd. That's not the meeting I was at. So, I mean, the language, I think it would be fair to say that it's inconclusive. Okay, I object to your concluding that it had no impact on housing affordability. That's going too far. From my notes of that meeting, the Clifford Cook admitted that by scraping Craigslist, it was an obsolete method for listing housing availability. Everybody had long since moved to Facebook, but they only had the tools to scrape Craigslist. And as a result, there was going to be biases in the data. He admitted that his methodologies were far from perfect, that the results would be skewed. And he went on to say that the data might be tainted by a myriad of other factors. So for us to say that you concluded, or that we somehow concluded that night that there's no effect on housing affordability, that's absurd. So I would like you to strike that conclusion. In fact, I hope you would strike just let the objections stand as what the community has expressed. You don't have to rush to defend or discredit all the concerns.
May I intervene, please?
Yes, please.
I think it was actually a really good idea to include what the concerns were and summarize how the committee had addressed all these doubts throughout the course of these 2 years.
I don't feel that we have, Francesca.
May I speak, Ron, please?
Let Francesca speak, please.
I'm not addressing myself to you. As I said previously, since we're talking, for instance, about what happened at that meeting with CDD involved, I am a renter. I share my place because I can't afford living alone. And I would have to agree with CDD. Craigslist is no longer the place where I find my roommates. That makes things difficult. I think he was really, really honest in explaining that, of course, every single time a scientist works with data, there's always going to be a margin for error. Perfection is something outside of this earth, and we're far from it. Everyone, even including every opposition. So I thought that it was really fair what he did. I thought that the data that he came up with were really, really fair. Not to mention, if we really took a moment, and I would like to address myself to the renters that are in the district and more largely in Cambridge, if we all sit down for a minute and think about what it is that's really driving costs through the roof for us, It's not, it's neither historical nor conservation district. The only way for us to remain where we are at an affordable cost is every single time we manage to find those old homeowners that have been in the neighborhood for long enough to not have a mortgage to sustain. Every single time there's even just new homeownership in place that rents to renters, the cost need to raise. But they need to raise not because they're mean and evil spirited people. They raise because their mortgages cost are high and land cost is high. But land cost is driven by other factors that have really nothing to see with any conservation district. And if anything, a conservation district, I strongly believe, will at least curb a little bit the tendency of encroaching with huge development. And every time you encroach with huge development, what you do is you raise naturally the cost even of a dump, because the land becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. But that has nothing to see with a house being historic in a conservation district or anything else. Nothing. And this would be admitting having some honesty in reading where the economy goes and what city development is. Not pointing fingers to somebody's honest work. That's where I stand. So thanks for putting the points, and I really welcome having them in the report. Also, I'm assuming the meeting will remain as recorded. So if people really want to take the time in listening to what went on for the past 2 years, they just need to press play.
Bill or Paula?
Sure. I have, I wanted to respond to Ron's comment about rebuttal, because I don't really see these as rebuttals. I think because of the complexity in many cases of the process, this is an opportunity to explain and not, I mean, to really clarify some of a couple of these points, and I'm going backwards. So the possibility of arbitrary or capricious commissions. I think it might be important, maybe for all of them, these are all real and legitimate concerns. So I agree that that should be acknowledged. However, some of it is based on some misconceptions. For one, the city manager just doesn't handpick people and put them on commissions. Each of them I've served on several throughout the years, and there is a process. Charlie mentioned screening, when we screen people, and usually it has not just to do, it has to do with some form of expertise or your community involvement. And yes, it is they're volunteers because you don't get paid for it. But it's less arbitrary than one might think, and it's less politically motivated. Like I said, they're even as it reads here. Charlie, you didn't mention that there is a screening process, and it's not just a hand-picked selection by the city manager. And so I think that most of the points, the cost of professional representation by applicants, some applicants, not for conservation, but certainly for the commission, some applicants do come with representation, and that is usually has to do with the size and the scope of the project. But if they have architects, if they have people who are, installing their windows, those people come. Some of them charge by the hour. Certainly the attorneys do, but it's not necessarily a requirement unless it's the scope of the project. And it is true that it's not any different from the appearance before any of the other commissions. So I, will look at these, but perhaps each of the concerns should be proactively acknowledged, but I do think that some of them do require some clarification.
Bill?
Yeah, it was just, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all of these subjects on housing affordability, cost and whatnot were all included at the request of Ron. Am I right? And I think the staff did a wonderful job summarizing what each of these salient factors are and how they impact the conservation district. I don't think it's a rebuttal at all. I think you're just stating each individual point and commenting on how it impacts the conservation district. And I think it's fine the way it is. We could probably tweak a few words here and there, but I don't think it's going to change any of the topics that are listed here at the request of Ron to try to address some of the issues of the opponents of a conservation district. That's my take.
One more thing. There was some comment early on about the goals being contradictory, and I think that this actually helps in clarifying what seems to be contradictory and fulfills also those doubts and those questions.
Yes, we spent a lot of time on vague goals and guidelines and how they were meant to be sort of contradictory because you can't be explicit in every particular case. So every goal doesn't pertain to every project, and every guideline is just what it is, a guideline to help a commission, adjudicate a particular situation. So.
Okay.
So can we go over these points one by one? Can we take the time to work through them?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Trying to pull up Charlie's latest version. Okay. So housing affordability. I think it's important that we express that people in the community are very concerned about this and the possible negative impacts that a neighborhood conservation district would have on housing affordability. I think it's a big mistake and a stretch to say that it doesn't affect affordability, that the NCD would not affect affordability. That's my 2 cents. Regarding the business district, it kind of correlates to the 2 letters from the East Cambridge Business Association that I emailed the group last night. I think we should make room there for the concerns of the East Cambridge Business Association, which is a pretty big organization in our district in the study area. But I don't have major problems
with the proposed poll, I don't know if we're going to get to that tonight. Wouldn't that, be a place for them to express their opposition to a conservation district as property owners?
Well, it's already been done. It's already included the 2 letters that I sent everybody last night.
Yeah, we reviewed those when they were sent out years ago.
I just thought it would be, the report, we're going off the rails here, but the report included a mention that you presented to ECBA, but it was a dead stop. It didn't say that the ECBA failed to support this petition. And I thought it was a big omission. And so I'm lobbying to include that fact in the narration, if that's what we're really doing here in the report, that this petition did not get the support of the ECBA despite being, presented at a meeting, special meeting. And there was 2 letters from the head of the ECBA as to why they could not support this effort. But we're getting off the track. So
Yeah,
let's
well,
go on
it's
to
a
that's a
much
good
bigger,
suggestion, Ron.
that's a much bigger organization, Ron. That covers quite a bit of property outside the district, and I don't think it's pertinent or relevant or should be included, as you stated, as being in opposition into
well,
the
Charlie made a big
conservation
deal in the
district.
report. Charlie made a big deal in the report, Bill, that you presented to them. But he left it at that.
We did present we presented
Good
what
stuff.
we were proposing.
This is Eric. If I could just interject, there is a mention on the ECBA's opposition and their proposed map on page 63 and 64 of the report. So I don't know if it'd be better to relocate that within the report or otherwise, but it is mentioned elsewhere in the report.
Yeah, I think it's relevant.
Maybe we could tie it in, Eric, where it's mentioned that they were presented.
Yep.
That would be helpful. The danger we get into the rebuttal format, Charlie, I'm going to your number 3, the cost of materials and labor. That's not really what I was talking about when I talked about additional costs. Here, I'm not talking about housing affordability. I'm trying to express the concern that many have expressed that there's all sorts of costs, not just the consultants that people feel that they need to have at the meetings, even though they're not required to. Some people just don't feel confident to go to these meetings without the architects and the lawyers and the consultants. But for you to take the broad topic of increased costs that may or may not affect affordability, and then narrow it down to just materials and labor, and specifically make it about windows and energy conservation, that does the concern a big disservice, Charlie. That's unfair. That's why I don't like the rebuttal format. So people, can we just leave it that people are concerned about the increased costs? If you read my report, there's many instances I was forced to go with far more expensive materials. This is the way things work in the real world with conservation districts and historic districts. So are we confident enough to just leave that as a concern? People are worried about increased financial costs and not narrow it down to be materials and labor, and certainly not narrow it down to be discussion of windows and energy conservation.
Well, Ron, I would say that this is not all about you and your concerns. I mean, this request for a discussion of public comment, public concerns came from many people. And so we're trying to address
them. And I think
in
you're
a
missing the
general
boat
way.
if you make it about windows.
Yeah.
You narrow.
Well, I don't think so.
the scope, and then you knock down the narrowed scope.
You're perfectly
That's the whole
correct.
point.
You're perfectly correct. There are intangible costs, and we can certainly mention that. But windows are a very, very frequent issue in conservation districts. We'd be remiss if we didn't point out that, yes, there may be costs, and here's how they can be addressed.
Ron,
So-
the issue about cost, I would argue, is also driven by the market. And right now, the cost for anything, any material related to architectural structures is through the roof, and it's got nothing to deal with conservation district or not.
Francesca, yes, I respect that everything is expensive these days. If you go back to my report I submitted last month, I gave many concrete examples that I was faced with. And I just like you to key on the garage door where I was forced to construct over a year's time a custom wood garage door at the cost of, I think, $6,500 or so. Where a very similar one ready-made that was rejected was about $1,000, a year prior. So things
I
quickly
work with
get
this
to be,
type of stuff every day. And I also know there's other ways to navigate these situations. So
well, I was appointed.
I wouldn't like to be lectured on this, sorry.
I'm not lecturing, Francisca. I'm accounting my experience where I was told by the historic committee in a different town that I was to follow the instructions of this historic commission member and his recommendations and work with him on making a custom door. So I think we should leave the community's concerns as concerns and not be dismissive of those concerns by trying to knock them down and refute each one. There are more. The number 4, the cost of professional representation by applicants. I think it would be far kinder to say that while the NCD would not require these consultants, many feel that they do need to bring and find it better and make the choice that they do bring these consultants. A compromise like that, Charlie. But to say that, oh, we don't require it, kind of ignores the fact that many do. And the last one on your list, number 5, the possibility of arbitrary capricious commissions. That links into another one that's not listed here, and that is the impingement on the rights of property owners. But I do think it's important, and thank you for admitting tonight that in the past, Cambridge NCDs have veered into the capricious and arbitrary. And it caused some grief to some people that were victims of that behavior. So, I mean, we can try to assuage and say that we'll make our best efforts to make sure that doesn't happen. But, let's not be dismissive of it. There's a few more complaints, concerns that I want to make sure it gets in this document. I emailed the study commission last night. Let's also include the concern about the stifling of creativity. Okay. This has been brought up by both those in our community, and I outlined a clear example of it in my report last month. I do acknowledge that we've stated as a goal that we don't want to stifle creativity, but I don't think just stating that as a goal is going to make that happen. The dynamics at work here and human nature is often to play it safe and not buck the system and give them what they want, give them what they expect, because everybody wants a quick approval. They don't want to lose time on their project. So creativity is stifling, and that affects the whole community. We all suffer when there's a lack of creativity in
Ron, we've had
construction.
almost 2 years of hearings while we had interim rules and regulations governing the conservation district in East Cambridge. I don't think there's one case where the commission stifled any kind of creativity or changes to properties, contemporary design changes or any of that. And I know of a couple that were approved almost by staff without even a hearing. So I don't know where you're going with stifling creativity on this, but
well, Bill, I'd be happy.
I just don't agree with you that a conservation district is going to stifle creativity when we specifically stated that we would allow contemporary designs and implementations and projects going forward and stuff like that.
Bill, I don't want to be argumentative, but look at the title, conservation. Okay. That's what it's for. So you want people to conform to the way things were, the way things are. Yes, you want to be open. I understand that. But in the real world, that's not how historic districts and conservation districts work. And I'd be happy to talk to you offline about my experience that I outlined in my report.
Actually,
I
I have
a real
a
concern. So
Since
you
we're
can
talking about-
disagree with the concern, but this is a real concern, and I think the community needs to be heard. They care about the stifling of creativity.
I would
And
argue
this
that
could be
your
an unintended
report's
consequence.
title bears hidden cost of historic and neighborhood conservation districts. You don't seem to have had experience with neighborhood conservation districts, only historic districts that don't pertain to Cambridge. That should probably be noted. Clearly.
So, the report was written about 2 other Eastern Massachusetts towns, historic districts that are governed by the same Massachusetts general laws as the neighborhood conservation districts. And
Not true.
No.
in the human behavior that takes place and the relationships and the swamp that is the relationships and people's experiences, and they're at play in both.
Every
Okay.
town and every historical commission is different. You know as much.
But the people in human behavior, I argue, is not. So you can refute, but to say that these aren't concerns, that's not fair. Okay, these are valid concerns that people
They've
have
been
about
acknowledged and
NCDs.
addressed.
Well, then let's include them in the report. I'm
They
asking them
are.
to be listed in the report. Well, no, this one is not listed, Francesca. That's why I'm asking it to be added to Charlie's list in this section.
How, give me an example of how the conservation district is stifling creativity.
Well,
haven't we allowed additions to property, historical properties in a contemporary design? In East Cambridge, we've had several properties where they were allowed to put contemporary buildings attached to conservation historical properties.
Bill, I'd like
Is
to
that
answer that.
stifling creativity? What kind of creativity are you referring to? Financial creativity?
No. Artistic.
Housing creativity? Architectural?
Mhm.
Well, we've allowed that.
Well, the NCD doesn't exist yet, Bill.
And we try to
I
cover
don't know
that
what
in
you've
rules
allowed.
and guidelines, Ron.
Creativity is a very subjective and broad term to define here. Once a
So I'll-
commission,
I'd like to answer Bill's questions, Francesca. So I'll do a quick scenario, Bill, where so-and-so had a fire, they have to redo their house, or they decide to knock down, rebuild a house, and they are not confident. They don't know the ways of East Cambridge. So they hire an architect, and the architect consults with them. And the architect had experience with other historic committees, let's say. And the architect says, it'd really be great to do this, but probably that might be controversial. So let's just do that. Let's scale it back. This happens in the real world. It happened to me. Okay. And it's all
Well,
in
I
my
don't
report.
think it would happen in Cambridge because
I'm
if a
giv-
property
it-
was deemed to be demolished and
Bill, it
torn
might
down
not
because
happen in
of a
Cambridge.
fire,
But I don't
They
know.
would-
It's a concern, Bill. It's just a concern. I'm not saying it's
there wouldn't be any
happening,
control from
but
the
it's a
conservation
concern.
district under your example, Ron.
Why?
If a
why won't
property
you
had a
allow
fire and it
the
had to
community's
be,
concerns to be
it
aired
had
in
to
the
be
report?
destroyed, taken down to the ground, foundation and everything, and it would be an empty lot, and it would be the purview of inspectional services and zoning on what wound up being rebuilt there. It would have nothing to do with stifling creativity,
Bill,
period.
I respect that that's what you believe, but you can't diminish people's concerns and saying that they're not valid. Okay, we're just trying to list these concerns.
Well, you're not accepting
Okay,
the fact
so-
that we set up guidelines and we had interim guidelines to encourage creativity. We've worked with people to put contemporary designs attached to historic properties. So I
did say
don't
that
see
in
your
last night's
point.
memo, Bill. I did admit that in last night's memo to you. I said, even though we said that we want to encourage it, We can't
Well, why
change
should
human
we
nature.
include a point in a proposed conservation district that we could possibly be stifling creativity?
Because this fear exists, this concern exists. It's a valid concern. And that's all we're doing in this section of the report. We're listing communities' concerns, Bill. It doesn't threaten the NCD. We're just listing the concerns.
No, I have
Okay, we'll
a
see
question.
Ron.
I have a question for Ron, if I may. Ron, are these your concerns, or are these, when you say these are community concerns, who are you referring to as the community? Especially since you have referred to your experience from a previous document that you submitted.
Right. Well, thank you. I obviously had my own experiences, negative experiences, but I do talk to other property owners in East Cambridge. I'm friends. I've been in the community for 30 years, and people are scared to death. You know, people have come to me, and I'd rather not name names, but people have concerns about the whole myriad of concerns. And I feel it incumbent upon me as the sole study committee member who's willing to give, you know, to air these concerns and have them included in the report. I just want them to be listed, okay? And I don't want them to be invalidated.
I think, Ron, I'm bringing up the concern is one thing, but the way you have described it here
Okay.
is really does not support what you just said. So if stifling creativity, it's also it's not been my experience as a commissioner that things are presented, particularly if making a substantial alteration to a property. I find that I've seen some very creative solutions rather than the play it safe solutions, particularly when there's an architect involved. My experience with architects are that they're very creative and they see this as
I agree.
really as an artist project. So that doesn't get stifled only if something is, you know, is outside of what any regulations from a myriad of commissions and departments in the city will allow. So I'm just I'm not in favor of dismissing a legitimate concern. I'm just not understanding what this concern is as you have presented it.
Well, Paula, I hope you're right. I hope we never will be stifling creativity in East Cambridge. But I'd be happy to talk with you offline outside of the scope of this and walk you through my experience in another town where it was explicitly discouraged. And it was a relatively small thing. It involved a deck. I don't know if you've read the report, but it involved
I have.
a deck. So I was encouraged not to do that because the committee might not go for it.
If anything, I would argue that part of the reason of this conservation district study is exactly to
It's the opposite.
It's exactly the opposite. And the case at 6668 Otis is exactly the perfect example against the stifling creativity. Because what happens most of the time, the regular builder boxes and let's flip the house and resell it for a higher cost and make as much money as possible, which typically happens with sales, not with rentals, tends to be done as cheaply as possible. And in doing so, what happens is a lot of the creative facades, a lot of the creative opportunities are just murdered and end up becoming the typical builder box that nobody wants because it's a little bit more typical of the sprawling communities outside of the city. There's a reason why people choose to live here and enjoy walking here. What's stifling is, personally speaking, places like Kendall Square, or the old North Point neighborhood. Now Cambridge Crossing, that's stifling. Do I really enjoy walking there? Not at all. So
Can I make a suggestion? Ron has a list of points, and maybe we should let him summarize the list without a lot of description, Ron, or a lot of discussion, because it's already past 7:30.
Okay.
We can see,
yes, please.
Eric and I can see how we can summarize
Right.
this. We can work
Yeah,
with Ron.
I
and
think-
if there's
I don't
something,
think
if there's something there that can be put in the report, we'll try to bring it back to you next month. But this is all, a matter of contention. So, but we have a limited amount of time to discuss it. So I don't want to cut the discussion short, but I'd like to organize the discussion
Okay.
so we
Charlie,
can get
I'll
through it, because I
continue.
have other things to talk about tonight.
And again, I would say that just listing these as concerns isn't validating them, but nor do they have to be refuted. Okay. But I think it's
Okay,
important.
yeah, I
for
got the point.
the report. Okay. The next one is the delays and loss of enjoyment due to lost time. You want me just to leave it at that, Charlie, or do you want me to get into what I'm talking about?
No, that's great.
Okay. Loss of enjoyment, loss of time. And that impacts financial costs as well. It was brought up earlier. I want to make sure there's one about the negative consequences of inconsistent, contradictory NCD goals and guidelines, because they would be subject to interpretation. That's the fear anyway. It also relates to the potential for arbitrary and capricious impingement on the rights of home and property owners. And that's an important one for many property owners, Charlie, because they feel like they're turning over power to people that they don't know, and it's frightening. Okay, people that they didn't elect, people that they don't know, people who might not agree with their aesthetics. It's a concern for property owners. And the last one, this is a biggie. Everybody I talk to thinks there is no consensus for an EC NCD. And I'll just leave that at that. I have the narration in my email to everybody last night. Again, I just would like these to be included in the reports. I think we should get away from the rebuttal format. I don't think it helps the report to try to knock it down, because they're each complex, and they're probably each would be a white paper in themselves, much like the affordability thing. But if we could just at least respect that some in our community that have these concerns, I'd like them to be included in the report.
Okay, thank you, Ron. I appreciate
All right.
that. I think that's valid. We'll try to put something together and bring it back to the committee. I do want the report to reflect the whole range of issues and concerns, and this is one way to do it. So it's 7:37. I'd like to have a few minutes of public comment, and then we did send out a revised text for a postcard poll, and I know Ron would like to speak to that, and so would many others.
I would have some comments and ideas about.
Oh, please, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And I don't mind spending some time to propose something maybe for the next meeting. I think it would be important to have something visually a little bit more impacting. For instance, there's a choice of picturing the houses on 3rd Street near the new Team Toomey Park. I think it would actually be more effective and clarifying of the conservation district to show something like the 6668 Otis house, and just explain and maybe do a comparison of, before after of a successful project versus something that went wrong. I was thinking, for instance, as a good example, there's something that went up on at the corner of Hurley Street and Lopez. That was actually recently redeveloped and has quite a modern addition at the end and sits right next to a historic house. And I think that came out pretty well for being a development. And I think if we could summarize in a table format, a little bit of the key points, addressing what happens in terms of, what happens to a homeowner when it comes down to do just like bare maintenance, and just summarize some of those points that will be found inside the report in a visually, graphically, easy peasy to understand chart that can already address some of the initial questions that may have. I think it would be a little bit more effective and simpler. That's all.
Okay. I may come back to you tomorrow, Francesca, and ask you for an outline of, or an example of.
Of course,
what you
happy to.
mean,
Yeah,
but
no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, let's have maybe 10 minutes of public comment. Is that a hand up, Ron, or is that, no? No,
Okay.
Okay,
Mary Ellen or Brian? You can unmute
2
yourself.
minutes, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, it's Mary Ellen. Can I just let you know that on the website, you have December's webinar listed as October in the text. If you could change that, that would be great. Last month's meeting, I waited to speak while 2 members that live outside the ECNCD were allowed to speak for more than 5 minutes. And at the end of the evening, you took names of people that were not able to speak. And you said that we were going to be able to speak at the beginning of this meeting, and that did not happen. So I would like to have time, 2 minutes at the end of this meeting, to say what I wanted to say at the end of the last meeting.
Can you say it now?
Do you want me to say it now? Because I have stuff that I want to say about that's relevant to what we're talking about. I thought I could save it for the end of the meeting because it's not directly relevant to what we're talking about right now. And I would like my 2 minutes for this and my 2 minutes for the last time. Thank you,
Okay,
Ron.
we have to. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ron, for this is today's. Thank you, Ron, for representing the opposing view. I agree with his additions, and I've stated several of them at previous meetings. These 5 questions read as if there was civil debate on these topics for those of us that have shown opposition. My experience is that I have cited a concern and a member of the committee says, I disagree, no, and we move on. It took me 4 times for you to include ADA law under sidewalks. When we're talking about windows, during these meetings, I talked about my neighbors that are a family of 6 on a 1-floor, 2-bedroom condo in a building that is in no way historic. One parent is on disability. They don't have the means to be able to deal with the system that you're throwing at them to be able to update their windows. They're desperately in need of updating their windows, so they haven't. The cost of professional representation. We have discussed at these meetings the documentation that was provided to owners that had to appear before the committee, and the fact that architects and attorney language was provided in a way that was alluded to, you really should bring them with you. And one homeowner who went on record stating that he had to spend $5,000 just to have his people at your meeting. Creativity. I talked about the fact that I was concerned with creativity. I am an artist, I use 3D printing, and the fact that I probably have to go through you guys to be able to put funky things on my house is alarming to me. So I agree with, and I have talked about it during these meetings, my creative outlet. And I have not talked to Ron about it, so it wasn't me who was talking to him. You left out the fact that I've repeatedly asked that properties on the historic registry be binding and homes that are not at all historic should not be binding. And on that note, I just want to state that homes like 82 Fifth Street, you need to fight so that he can be on the historic registry. There are homes that should be on the historic registry that have not been fought for by this commission to be put on the historic registry. So I think there are
Thank you,
several
Mary.
homes that should. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to you.
Okay, Audrey, 2 minutes.
Okay, just briefly, first of all, I do not believe that Charlie is dismissing people's concerns. I think what he's doing is explaining why they really don't have those concerns. They're valid concerns on their part, but they're not really legitimate because he's going by the facts. They did some research. They had different departments do some research. And I just think that the rebuttal, as one of the members would call it, should remain in there. I mean, I don't think they're rebuttals. I think they're an explanation of why the concerns maybe aren't as valid as they think they are. And I think it's like anything. If you went to a physician and you have a concern, oh, I have this problem, and the physician says, well, you really don't need to have that concern because there is nothing wrong. And I think there's one commission member that's just afraid for some reason of East Cambridge having a conservation district. And if any district needs it, we do. And I think that all of what Charlie had said in that part of the document should remain. That's all.
Thanks, Audrey. Betty Sicoccio, you're next.
Hi, it's Marie Sicoccio. I'm on Betty's computer. I'd like to direct myself to ECBA, since I was the one who originated the group, and we met for at least a year prior to any kind of conservation district petition being filed. Every time we met, which was probably twice a month, I emailed Jason Alves of ECBA inviting him. We wanted him at the table. We wanted ECBA at the table. There was a sincere interest in improving Cambridge Street, and we were well aware that a lot of the small businesses were recently sued under the ADA in federal court, and the cases essentially are called drive-by cases. That no one's really looking for alterations, they're just looking for attorney's fees, and they got them. A conservation district actually is a very good insulation and buffer against that kind of abuse. So that was our original motivation for including Cambridge Street. But I also want, if you're going to include anything about ECBA, ECBA's jurisdiction is Emmons Square all the way down to Kendall. It has members like Alexandria and Leggett McCall. I know business owners on Cambridge Street. They're not opposed to this. They're within the district. They're not big time lab developers. So if you're going to include anything about ECBA, I want ECBA's jurisdiction, who their membership really is, to be front and center. And I actually, and I don't think I was the only one who invited ECBA to the table. We wanted them there. If they weren't interested, they should have showed, they should have discussed it. They had ample opportunity.
Okay, time.
Thank you, Marie.
Marie, thank you. Patrick McGee, you're next.
Good evening, thank you. I think it's important for people to understand an aspect of human nature where the people in favor of this clearly see the best case scenario. And unfortunately, the people that have some trepidation about it seek out the worst case scenario. And trying to find somewhere in the middle is probably a smart place to be. I would like to take my time just to ask a quick clarifying question about the point number 5 that Charlie discussed earlier, the possibility of an arbitrary or capricious commissions from forming. and you mentioned in the past when it happened, the remedy for that was, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was fairly quick, was to not renew those persons' terms when they were up. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the immediate remedy.
Okay.
Another remedy, and I'll stop the clock on you, Patrick, but another remedy was that there is a very easy no-cost appeal from any NCD decision to the Cambridge Historical Commission. Any instance in which an applicant feels that a NCD commission has been arbitrary or capricious can be appealed within a month to the Cambridge Historical Commission. And the Historical Commission has overturned or returned decisions to NCD commissions on several occasions, not frequently, but enough that it's a well-worn procedure over the last 30 years. So I just throw that out there. And I'll start your clock again, Patrick.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification. I guess 2 points that would come up with that. I'm curious as to when staff and then the city manager at the time felt that there was a potential issue and how long it took, how many residents had to go in front of a board where there was a belief that there was an issue with either a member or the entirety of the commission. That seems problematic. I'm just, if it didn't get dealt with until the end of their term, that's upwards of 2 or 3 years, if I'm wrong. And then it's wonderful that there's a no-cost appeal, but all of that and then getting sent back to the neighborhood commission would add on time for your lawyer and your architect. And it's hard to believe that someone who lost their case the first time around wouldn't come prepared with both a lawyer and an architect, all of that adding additional costs and time and efforts to their desired outcome. So I think this is a serious, the possibility of people willing to donate their time are going to be more bent towards stricter conservation than the vast majority of the residents. And this is, I think this is something that really needs to be worked through, or at least allow the public to realize that this is a potential issue. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just respond quickly that we've had 3 neighborhood conservation district commissions that have been meeting for, 30 years, 20 years, and 20 years, and almost monthly in each case. And the number of instances we've had of a commission going off the rails in this manner is 1. So and in the manner in which commissioners were not reappointed is what I'm getting at. In other cases, we've sent cases back to NCD commissions. But again, that happens perhaps once a year, if that. And so the instance is really slight or minimal. You know, I bring it up because many people have this concern about arbitrary or capriciousness, and I have to acknowledge it does happen. But there are remedies for that, and that makes my point. So Sarah, who else do we have?
We have 3 more, Justin, Alan, and then Chris.
Okay, well, whatever. Let's go.
Hi, Justin Safe, 259 Hurley Street. I entirely endorse what Ron Creamer has said about this document, which is entirely one-sided in both presentation and the response. I'm not sure what everyone is afraid of here and letting those who are concerned about the NCD have their own words included without these biased presentations and refutations. Also, just to set the record straight, our NCD ordinance very much does refer to the same statute as historical commissions, MGL Chapter 40C. The only difference is that our local ordinance bans NCD control of paint color and can, of course, include all of the arbitrary guidelines that we're arguing over tonight. the arbitrary nature of the guidelines, wherein it's impossible to satisfy several of the guidelines at once, including those dealing with preserving neighborhood character or encouraging affordable housing, is what allows for the instances such as were just explained, where someone can always appoint to some aspect of the guidelines in support of whatever decision they wish to reach. Further, on housing affordability, the representative from CDD stated that the information he gathered could not establish that NCD districts did not increase housing costs. And the claim here and the use of this data is entirely inappropriate. And finally, on housing economics, it's not just land value, but building restrictions such as zoning that impact housing costs. NCDs are another limitation on building, similar to zoning. In fact, the reason that Brookline's NCD ordinance was struck down by the land court was because it invaded the area of land use regulation that is the proper province of zoning without following our state law on zoning, MGL Chapter 40A. Thank you.
Alan?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name's Alan Green again, and I live at 82 Fifth Street. I was not going to speak, but then I think an earlier speaker mentioned my house where I live, and that it's not included in, let's say, the National Registry of Historic Places as part of East Cambridge is. And I agree that my house is rather significant, and I invite you to come down and take a look at it because it is rather significant in this neighborhood. I love this neighborhood, and I like to see this neighborhood stay the way it's been for the last 200 years in scale, in architecture. And one of the reasons why I support the neighborhood conservation district is because it's not enough protection right now. My house is excluded from the historic registry. It shouldn't be. It should be protected. I'm tired of seeing developers like propose things, tear down things, and build bigger things in their place without any concern for neighboring buildings next to them. So I support this in general. I also want to return to the slide that was talked about at the first part of our meeting, slide about part 3A. And in that text, I just want to clarify one thing. You have listed East in-house. You've listed East in Union, and it's actually East in-house now. So I think that should be changed back. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Chris, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, this is Chris Smith, 145 Fifth Street. I read the criticism and the response, which I guess I would characterize as rebuttals. And what I feel like isn't being acknowledged as the concern is that this is a really substantial burden on property owners, and maybe that's worth it. And that's kind of the job of the committee. I don't happen to think it is worth it. And the conclusion I take from those rebuttals is that there really is no burden on property owners, and that it would be cheaper to conform to not replace windows and so forth. If this is true, then I don't really see why the review would need to be binding, because the property owners it would be in their interest to follow it. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. And that brings us back to Mary Ellen for your second point. Mary Ellen.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to cut it out as much as possible. I want to go back to Mr. Kramer's experiences. He is simply putting that the human factor is an important factor to consider when constructing these kinds of documents. Neighbors will have to sit on commissions and enforce the rules outlined in the document, and your final document has contradictions that will be hard even for those that have best intentions. And just about East Cambridge, since September of 2019, my son, who is now 16, has had to alter his walk to catch the bus for school on Cambridge Street because owners of a bona fide historic house were unable to keep up on repairs to their home, and bricks ended up falling on pedestrians. There are hundreds of structures in this neighborhood just like that. While debate on this issue constantly brings up not wanting low-income housing in our neighborhood, you've completely overlooked the current, have been here for decades, low-income residents of East Cambridge. Just in the past 3 years alone, we've lost at least 6 iconic matriarchs and patriarchs of the neighborhood. I mean names that everyone in Cambridge knows. They have long lives in East Cambridge, had big families, and owned multiple homes. After their deaths, most of the families have sold the houses, as they have their right to do. But 90% of these houses were at a point where the next owner was looking at a complete gut renovation. Given the population of East Cambridge, this will be the norm here for the next several years. And let me tell you how badly I would like to move in out of my current 800 square foot condo into something just a little bit bigger. If the homes were move-in ready, I would have a chance to purchase them. But with the extra budget needed for renovations and now for this, and the majority of families that are in the same boat currently living in East Cambridge, none of us have a chance. This document does absolutely nothing for current homeowners except to add burden. You continue to hold up the worker cottages as the end all and be all, but none of you live in these original homes. These houses have short ceilings, small rooms, small windows, thin walls, and electric is not grounded, and they were built without insulation and were built with materials that those who constructed them never believed that they would be here in the 21st century. I can stop. You got the point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. That's it.
Okay, so it's 7:59 and I think it'd be premature anyway to talk about the postcard poll and the community outreach. We'll bring this back to you again next month. Maybe one of these months we can wrap this up and decide whether to move forward and how to move forward. So thanks very much, and we'll see you in February.